Well, welcome to WGC Explorers. We are here today with Doug Shanda, CEO of Mexico Pacific Limited. Doug has over 25 years of experience in the energy sector, including nearly 15 years of direct experience leading LNG liquefaction projects in North and South America. Doug, welcome to WGC Explorers.
Thank you, Terry. Appreciate that.
I think the best way to start off here for you to tell us a little bit about yourself and your company.
Great. Well, myself, I've spent my career building and operating projects in the oil and gas industry, 25 years, as you mentioned. The majority of those years and projects were in LNG, and that included developing projects from concept through steady state operations. Having done this many times, I know what does, and more importantly, what doesn't work across all aspects of development for this type of project. These factors are exactly what drew me to Mexico Pacific Limited. It's the incredible fundamentals of our project. Our project is a 14.1 MTPA anchor project located in Puerto Libertad in the state of Sonora on the west coast of Mexico. It's a huge and unique site. This location has fantastic ground conditions, plenty of room to grow. We don't have to dredge. It's just a dream site. Most importantly, our site is uniquely located in close proximity to the world's cheapest gas basin, the Permian. That's in our backyard, and the engine room of the LNG demand is in our front yard, Asia. Our project is really a stepping stone connecting these key gas supply and LNG demand centers. That allows us to deliver the lowest landed price of LNG free from the risk of Panama Canal. That's one of those wonderful fundamentals about our project. The other thing we have going for us is our highly experienced management team. This team has delivered great progress in the commercial, technical, and regulatory areas in the last year. We're now not only targeting FID for our first two trains this year, but we're also planning to double our facility capacity. And that's really aimed at capturing that excess demand for our LNG on our project.
On the talk today about how this project fits into this insane energy environment that we're all experiencing. I was very interested in doing this interview because looking back over the last 2 months, global oil prices have soared to the highest levels in 7 years. People are talking about $100 a barrel. Europe's in the grips of a natural gas shortage that's shaken up the energy markets everywhere. And believe it or not, the global demand for coal has surged to record levels as everybody bounces back from the down year of the pandemic. Now, I've been in the energy industry for 45 years now, and I have to say this is not the first up-down cycle I've seen, but and that's the way that markets work. But we both know that energy prices go up and down in cycles, and there are several reasons prices could fall in the next few months. But do you see this kind of volatility being the norm going forward? Is the era of cheap gas over? This is a question on a lot of people's minds.
It's important to understand why we're here today. The LNG market and pricing have long been highly cyclical, driven by the level of LNG investment brought online. Those prices creep higher, buyers dependent on LNG imports for national energy security, contract for long-term supply, and more LNG supply is sanctioned and brought online. The market balance is oversupply for some time before, again, demand outstrips supply, and off we go again on this roller coaster ride. We've been forecasting the LNG market rebalancing and need for further LNG investment to meet that demand growth for a few years now. What has taken the market by surprise, I think, however, is the trajectory and the speed in which that demand has come to market as a result of faster than anticipated pandemic demand recovery, exacerbated by reduced LNG contracting and storage in Asia and Europe. The reduced LNG storage has been really interesting to watch. It took the world some time to realize the key role natural gas needs to play if we're going to make real and continued progress towards that global energy transition goals that we've set. The uncertainty around gas supply to Europe has further exacerbated that situation. And on the topic of price volatility, weather events, European gas supply outcomes, various political situations will continue to play prevalent roles in how pricing plays out over the coming months. I will, however, say this: high price volatility isn't good for anyone in the long term. I think we can all agree to that. We have to remember that LNG is predominantly a long-term market. we're on the path to being commoditized, but we still have a long way to go before we're truly fully commoditized. The majority of Asian countries, that's the region that represents 70% of the current and future demand. They're highly reliant on LNG for national energy security. This region has depleting indigenous reserves and the highest demand growth globally. Not a great combination if that's where you live. It's also the region of focus for the energy transition, with the greatest impact coming from emissions reductions achieved through coal to gas switching. These customers need a reliable long-term LNG coverage to ensure national energy security and support their energy transition goals. However, the heart of any contracting decision is always going to be the price competitiveness of the LNG. These decision makers need reliable and manageable LNG pricing to underpin these contracting decisions. The high and volatile prices creates negative contracting sentiment, just as extremely low pricing does. What we want to see is LNG pricing return to a stable window of around $8 to $10. In this range, LNG is economic over the longer term for buyers and sufficient for broader new LNG to be sanctioned, and that supports stabilization prices. It's clear that that's the only way to bring LNG pricing back to a more palatable, stable range to support further LNG supply to be sanctioned in the market.
It's clear that the soaring global gas prices are sending a signal that more supply is needed. You mentioned, and actually it's a very good prospect, that the United States will be the #1 LNG exporter later this year as a couple of facilities come online, which is an absolutely amazing story compared to 5 years ago. What I find interesting is that a year and a half ago, you couldn't give away gas. People were concerned about spot markets and being able to offload cargoes. And now there's a lot of negotiation going on for longer term sales and purchase agreements. You think this focus on long-term contracts will help build some of these projects that were on the bubble a little bit? And we're going to see a lot more FIDs in 2022?
More supply is absolutely necessary. I mean, that's a fact. However, I'm not sure I would label, the resulting outcome, as a bubble necessarily. If you look historically at LNG market cycles, there's always a period of undersupply addressed by marginal overcontracting. When I first entered this business in 2010, prices, at that time were historically high. Then they dipped to historically low prices. Then they dipped to historically, went back up to historically high prices. Today we see close to 100 MTPA of additional LNG being required by 2030. And much of that needs to be sanctioned in 2022 and 2023 to be reliably available through that demand period. I think the challenge the market has is whether the traditional contracting window is already passed. And what that does is it leaves customers exposed to higher prices for longer periods. LNG projects take around 10 years from development through to operations. Very long lead time permits, coupled with long engineering contracting periods before you can reach FID. And these facilities aren't built in a year or 2 years. They take 4 to 5 years to build and reach that steady state operations. I mean, while there are currently plenty of proposed LNG projects, I don't think that all of them will be sanctioned. Buyers are being more selective, we see, and rightly so. The market's quite competitive these days, even though it's a increasingly hot market. We see a handful of 2022, 2023 FIDs, including ours. However, I think the majority of the projects don't or won't meet those buyer and market requirements, which will result in a prolonged market supply imbalance through to and probably beyond 2030.
A very interesting perspective on that. Now, you mentioned that gas is the answer to a lot of the environmental climate issues we're talking about, but it is a rapidly changing environment. We're seeing a lot of investors and environmental activists trying to stop the funding of all fossil fuel projects. You mentioned high prices is not necessarily good because it makes renewables more competitive. It certainly makes coal more competitive. And then there's this huge issue of greenhouse gas emissions associated with natural gas. it's a lot of uncertainty. And how do you think that's going to affect gas's role as a transition fuel? And how will this impact the LNG market?
I think we need to acknowledge that there is not one global response that can be applied across all carbon emitting markets. That's a really risky approach. And it's one that places global targets and the time to reach those targets at risk entirely. If you look at the Asian region and the markets that are within that region, these are a prime example of the need for a nation by nation approach. Each nation and emerging nations in particular, they need to adopt a path that will allow them to transition to net neutral in a manner that also enables those nations to grow and continue to improve their economic and social conditions for their people. If we try to immediately enforce high-priced alternatives, we risk these markets choosing not to actively participate, and that's not good for any of us. Instead, what we need to do is we need to acknowledge that beyond natural gas being required over the long term to support renewables and emerging technologies, coal to gas switching remains an immediately accessible initiative for developing and emerging markets, and one that is capable of incredible global carbon change. Our investors and lenders recognize this. If you take China as an example, according to the UN Sustainable Development Report, if China was to reduce their emissions by around 70% to 2 tons of CO2 per capita per year, that would translate into 31% closer to the world achieving the SDG target on CO2 emissions. I mean, that's incredible. So when you think about LNG provides this virtual pipeline for countries needing natural gas to support their energy security needs and their energy transition goals. Here at MPL, we believe we're on the right side of this. We're making conscious decisions to reduce carbon emissions rather than produce and store carbons. We also provide a significantly shorter transit route to Asia when compared to the projects on the US Gulf Coast, resulting in reduced tanker emissions as well. We're also proud to provide Permian gas producers another alternative to flaring. If you think about the annual flared and vented gas in the Permian, if all of that was captured and liquefied, it would fill a QMax carrier about every 10 days. Well, that's a lot of flared gas. We provide a less congested Permian pipeline evacuation route, able to take that gas that would have otherwise been flared or vented to end users who need that gas, and in turn, use that gas to reach our energy transition targets.
You obviously see the demand there because last month you announced that you doubled the potential capacity of your project. But most people think about LNG in Asia. They think about Japan, Korea, and China. I wonder if you have thoughts about the other markets there, some of the Southeast Asia, for example, the Vietnam, the Thailands, and that part of the world. What would be the challenges in developing these, which are right now smaller markets?
Many spectators assume that JKT represents a declining market. However, we still see growth, albeit more moderate when compared to China, for example. The JKT market represents phenomenal recontracting opportunity. Right now, I think it's forecasted at 70 MTPA of contracts expiring by 2030. Outside of JKT, I'm sure everyone's familiar with China's growth story. Huge demand growth across all their sectors: power, industry, residential, commercial. And a lot of that's driven by emphasis on coal to gas switching under the blue sky policy. When you look at ASEAN and South Asian markets, these also provide a huge growth opportunity. GDP growth with material power and industrial demand is being developed. They're also seeking coal to gas switching to meet their targets. And they're looking at these LNG to power opportunities. I think, however, many of the ASEAN and South Asian markets need support in bringing this LNG demand to market. They're smaller markets, they need that help. So what we're seeing many of the IOCs and more traditional buyers in Asia partnering with these markets for that very purpose. Each of these regions, while admittedly sensitive to pricing, continue to need LNG for energy security purposes. Many of the APAC countries have little to no indigenous resources or are facing diminishing domestic or international pipeline availability due to the depletions of reserves in neighboring countries. They're looking to LNG for a reliable and affordable source of energy that also reduces their emissions.
The big question with so many economies in Asia making net zero emissions pledges that whether or not actually LNG will have a role in meeting these net zero emissions, or LNG will be a victim of countries wanting to meet these net zero emissions. A hot topic, and one that is on everyone's mind, and is decarbonization of LNG. And many believe that for natural gas to remain relevant as a transition fuel, decarbonizing the LNG value chain will be key. And if we're able to do that, then LNG will in fact remain an important part of this energy transition in the Asian markets. We see developers enhancing their ESG positioning. They talk about purchasing sustainably produced gas with carbon capture, et cetera. But it's exciting to see that just last week you announced that you'll be working with ConocoPhillips LNG licensing at Bechtel to reduce your facility's carbon footprint. I think we'd all be very interested to hear what your plans and the challenges you'll face in reducing these emissions and decarbonizing your operations.
Beyond natural gas being a required energy transition bridge, particularly for Asia, we're excited about our low carbon LNG collaboration with our partners, ConocoPhillips and Bechtel. I think with this collaboration, we have this group of great thought leaders focused on avoiding emissions being produced in the first place, rather than focusing on what to do with the emissions after they are produced or merely tracking those emissions. We're lucky to have the luxury to take on this responsibility. I think our location drives that, over 350 days of sunshine at our location. But this is also something that the project fundamentals afford us to do. In fact, our company and project was selected for this collaboration by Bechtel and ConocoPhillips based on the merits of the project. And we're truly designing the next generation of LNG facility. We're the tip of the spear on this, we believe. What this collaboration is going to do is going to bring together the best in the LNG industry. Our leadership team, we've got extensive experience in developing and operating these projects. We've actually delivered over a third of the global LNG in operations today. We've got Bechtel, who's successfully delivered over 46 trains globally. We have ConocoPhillips that provides this premier technology, is paving the way, with also adding into the mix responsibly sourced gas. Now, this combined experience provides the platform to design this next generation lower carbon LNG. As I said, we're in a location where we have over 350 days of sunshine. It's also a location where there's great wind resources. We have excellent renewable opportunities available for us to look at what the next generation of LNG facility looks like. What happens after, going truly low carbon LNG. And I think that's the exciting thing we've kicked off and we're working through with our great partners, Bechtel and ConocoPhillips.
That's quite a combination of opportunities to reduce your carbon footprint. I mean, you mentioned in a sustainably produced gas, you have the opportunity to build renewable facilities, maybe perhaps solar to power the plant, et cetera. That'd be very interesting to watch as your construction progresses. You think the Asian countries would pay a premium for responsibly produced LNG or sustainably produced LNG?
Price competitive remains paramount for the LNG customers in Asia. Remember, LNG imports are critical for them, again, to ensure national energy security. Looking at Asia, the current and future key demand center for LNG, this is a region that remains heavily reliant on coal. And it's one of the largest contributors to global carbon emissions. They currently aren't necessarily focused on large scale or long-term LNG offsets or carbon neutral LNG, let alone products they need to pay a premium for. They can achieve a far more economic and greater carbon emissions reductions by focusing on the use of natural gas to displace that coal. It becomes a capital allocation question. Do you pay more for the carbon offset in power generation, or less for a market-based natural gas that allows you to switch from coal to gas and achieve greater emissions reductions for a cheaper price? When you're in a price-sensitive market, I think the answer is self-evident.
When do you expect your project to be in service and delivering LNG?
For us, we've made great progress in the last year. I mean, it's a true testament to the team we have, and just the great fundamentals we have here. Right now, we're on track to bring this project online this year. We're looking forward to taking the FID on the first 2 trains this year, and move forward with the expansion and what comes after that, shortly after that.
Well, Doug, let's shift gears now and talk a little bit about the World Gas Conference, which is just months away. We're delighted that NPL is a sponsor of WGC 2022. And this conference will be held in Daegu, Korea, and it's coming up May 23rd to May 27th. And all of you out there, the registration is still open. Doug, from your perspective, what are the benefits and reasons to participate in a major industry event like the World Gas Conference in Daegu?
I think the World Gas Conference, it's always provided really a preeminent opportunity for the industry to come together to discuss markets, technology, emerging trends, everything to do with gas around the globe. Having been subjected to these virtual engagements for 2 years, it's going to be really nice to reconnect with all of our colleagues in person in Daegu. I'm looking forward to that.
What we're excited about is that WGC 2022 will be the first major energy conference and exhibition, as you noted, since the winter of recovery from the pandemic, and it's occurring in this extremely volatile period in energy markets. So, and looking ahead to May, and rather than look back on the things we've talked about that have occurred the last 2 years, from your perspective, what topics would be the most important ones to discuss concerning the future of the natural gas industry this May?
But we're emerging from a period of monumental uncertainty across all facets of our industry. I think the World Gas Conference in May, it presents an opportunity for the entire industry to come up for air, regroup on these ever-shifting market dynamics, the demand recovery and growth, LNG supply responsiveness, and of course, align on where the industry is headed in this ever important low carbon net zero space. I'm looking forward to that, actually.
Well, I look forward to seeing you there. It's going to be quite a conversation that we're going to have over the course of that week. Well, Doug, thank you very much for participating in this interview. Good luck with your project. We're all going to be watching it very closely now, and let's hope that life gets a little simpler as the months go on.
Absolutely, and thank you, Terry. I really appreciate it.
Great.